Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Moto Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Nesler. Each week we're bringing you an inside look at the brands of Moto, the athletes of Moto. How did they build their brands? The companies that you know and love so much. What have they done to get your attention and turn that attention into revenue over the years? Today's interview is with somebody a little bit different than our normal guests. This is an interview that I did late this past summer of 2019, and I've been holding it, trying to figure out, man, when's a good time to put this one out, because it's not your average episode, and it's one that I'm really excited for you to hear. As a motocross fan, you may or may not follow American flat track racing. You may like it, you may not like it, but what you can't ignore is the fact that it is growing rapidly right now in comparison to the previous 4 or 5 years when it was just kind of there. One of the big reasons for its rapid growth is the man in charge. The CEO of American Flat Track, Michael Lock, joined me this past summer to talk about that. Now, even though it's been several months since our interview, what we discuss is still very relevant today, and it's a matter of his past. And you're going to hear very early in the episode what he's done. I mean, it's astonishing where he's come from, and the fact that American Flat Track now has him on their team. The guy's a genius, and what he is doing to change that sport and grow that sport is something that I think we all can learn for our own company, our companies. I also think it's something that, the sport of supercross and motocross obviously could take away from the mind that Michael Lock has. So I'm really excited to have him. If I reference the Nationals or anything like that, which I don't believe I do, just know that it was recorded during the summer. So hope you enjoy. If you have questions that you'd like to get answered on this show, continue to send them to questions at motomarketingpodcast.com. I've started to also answer them on my personal Instagram account via some live stream videos, some Instagram story content. So if I get a bunch of questions, I like to just answer them on there, so you don't have to wait for the podcast, but I also will answer them on here. Also, I started letting you know the guests that we're going to be interviewing the current week. I let you know on my Instagram so that you can drop me whatever questions you would like for me to ask them. I will let you know that. I'll continue to let you know that, so be sure to keep close tabs on my IG story to know who the guests that are going to be on the show if you'd like to ask them a question. All right, let's get into it and hear from Michael Lock, the CEO of American Flat Track Racing.
Welcome to the Moto Marketing Podcast, presented by RacerX, the podcast for moto industry professionals, entrepreneurs, and riders. If you want to grow your brand and business in today's digital-first world, you have to know how to turn a stranger into a fan, turn a like into a customer. You have to know how to turn attention into dollars. This podcast is dedicated to keeping you in the know on real marketing tactics that work in the moto world so that you grow your business and help grow the sport. Get ready to learn from the very same marketing experts trusted by RacerX, Lucas Oil Pro Motocross, GNCC, and NBC Sports. They'll help you navigate the world of digital marketing for your moto brand. This is the Moto Marketing Podcast. Presented by RacerX.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Moto Marketing Podcast presented by RacerX. As promised, we've got a special guest on the line today. He is the former CEO of Ducati. He's the former Chief Operating Officer of Lamborghini, and he is the current CEO of American Flat Track, the series that is just hotter than coals right now. We've got Mr. Michael Lock on the podcast today. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, good morning. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, listen, the reason that we wanted to have you on this show is because the Moto Marketing Podcast is a show dedicated to talking to industry professionals that are behind a brand. And when it's behind a brand that wasn't always as great as it currently is, there's a story, and oftentimes a comeback story. What was done to bring this awesome product that might have been struggling to get the attention, the exposure, and just having this factor of interest behind it to where it is today. And there's there's a few brands in mind when anybody thinks about this in the motorsports realm, but I think American Flat Track is one of the first ones that comes to mind with me. Just how popular it's become over the last couple of years, and this year is I would assume one of the best years that the series has had. And who better to talk to than the guy at the top? So that's what we're wanting to dive into today, and really looking forward to hearing your story. You've obviously been behind some big brands. For those that didn't know, I was excited to see that you were with Ducati and Lamborghini, and that obviously, in my opinion, probably has a lot to do with why American Flat Track is doing so well. Somebody that has the experience that you have. So let's dive into that. Where are we currently at? If somebody is new to American Flat Track, what is the sport? What's the interest behind it? Why would somebody want to tune into this sport and come to it live or watch it on television? Let's start there.
Okay, well, that's a good set of questions. I mean, I can say that American Flat Track is a curious sport. Curious in that it's the oldest form of motorcycle racing in the U.S., but it has an atmosphere and an aura around it at the moment. But it's the newest. And we've managed to, I hope, capture and celebrate the rich heritage of the sport. The national championship goes back to the early 1950s, and the sport has origins that go back way beyond that, all the way to the board track races of the 1920s. So I think what we've done is we've tried to pay homage to that and to respect the past and the champions and the rich storytelling, and try and combine that with presenting and positioning the sport, telling the story of the sport in a very modern way. So we have an aggressive social media strategy. I know everybody says they do, but actually having one is about having your finger on the pulse of your fan base. It doesn't mean they agree with you all the time, but they engage with you regularly. And I think that in a world where many entertainments are competing for people's attention and for their wallet, making noise, being relevant, entertaining, doing it on a regular basis is critically important. So we try to take this very traditional sport, and combine it with a modern positioning and engagement with fans. And one thing I will say about the actual sport of flat track itself is that despite it being this very traditional sport, its format is ideally suited to today. So if you go to an American flat track race and you sit in the grandstand, the first thing you'll notice is you can see the whole course. You can watch the whole race from start through the development of the race through to its conclusion. You can see the whole thing. That's number one. Number two, the races are relatively short format. Heat races are 5 or 6 laps. Sometimes that can be a couple of minutes. Semis are not much longer. Main events are 15 or 25 laps. So a really long race in American flat track is about 15 minutes long. You compare that to a lot of traditional motorsports, which can go on for an hour or two, or dread the 3 or 4 hours. I think that time has passed for people to be able to find the time or the patience to be able to do that. So we naturally have a sport that is very well attuned to people's kind of ADD outlook,
how they're consuming content today in general.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's just too much choice. There's too much choice. There's too many things you can do. You don't even have to get up off your couch. So I think that understanding that that's the environment we live in, and then looking at the product, the sport you've got, and saying, where's the intersection? How do I find the best intersection? How do I get to know people?
Sure.
Because if you get to a core audience and you entertain them, they'll tell other people. And that's what's been happening with American Flat Track for the last 3 or 4 years, is we started by repositioning the conversation with our core enthusiast base who've been following the sport for 30, 40 years. And by challenging their perceptions of the sport and modernizing and making some investments and changing things up, we really re-engaged them. And some people didn't like what we were doing. Very often people with a conservative outlook like to hold on to what they've got, regardless of how imperfect it is. And we challenged that a bit. But the level of engagement, whether people like what you're doing or don't like what you're doing, as long as they keep coming back to contribute and criticize or to praise, you can grow your customer base. And we knew from the outset of this project that 100,000 people across the United States following Flat Track meant that we were in the shadows. We were not in the limelight. We had to increase that reach of the sport to something that motorcycle manufacturers, who we needed, or potential sponsors or partners for the series, we had to raise our reach to the level it was worth them even in considering making an investment. And that was a priority really from day one.
So talk to me about that, because I think that's an area in the motocross and supercross realm that frustrates so many of the core fans. And we'll use the TV broadcast, for example. Folks criticize the commentators for saying very simple, elementary things like Justin Barshaw on the blue Yamaha, and the NBC Sports team makes the argument that it's, well, we're trying to introduce this to a new audience. So talk to me about what were some of the things that you were conscious about and that you specifically did to appeal to a new audience without talking down to or in some ways offending your core fans, because I would be a good example. I love the motorsports realm, but I'm not somebody that would have followed this sport for so many years that if you simply just talk to a core enthusiast the same way you talk to me, I'm going to find myself lost. And I think that's an area that other areas of two-wheeled racing struggle. How do I appeal to a new audience without making the core followers of this sport feel like I'm ignoring their interests and needs and talking down to them?
Yeah, this is the eternal question, particularly if what you're concerned with is turning around something. A startup is easy. A brand new sport or a brand new product is that everything you say is new, and you can control the dialogue. But you take a traditional sport like this, even Supercross. Supercross has been around 40 years now. It's an established sport. You take any of these established sports where long-term fans have a high degree of ownership of that sport. They feel that they've done their time in the sport. They know the sport. They know very well where it ought to go, and they're very critical of innovative action that's taken if it isn't what they would have done. So, and Flat Track is a perfect example of that. The answer to your question is in the details. And what I mean by that, you presented an example of the broadcast team, and broadcast is today still the number one way to reach any kind of fan. We found this.
Sure.
We're in our third season with NBC. The Flat Track had not been on television since the 1980s, so long since nobody could remember. So we debuted on NBC SN in 2017. We're now in our third season, and I can tell you, you have to be acutely aware of who your stakeholders are, and we have two types of stakeholders in Flat Track fan stakeholders. One is the traditional fans who know everything, and on points of detail or history or data facts will be more knowledgeable than any broadcast crew I could find. So you're not chasing in cleverer than the hardcore fan. You have to know that from the outset. But on the other hand, you have to have talent, and you have to prepare them sufficiently well that they don't insult the intelligence of the hardcore fan. I tell you what, Luke, just work. What you do is you find people who are skilled broadcasters, who have sufficient credibility that anybody would take note of them, and then you have to brief them. And I can tell you that for every show in 2017 and almost every show in 2018, both myself and our chief marketing officer, Gene Crouch, flew to Charlotte to sit with the commentary team while they did the voiceovers. We would spend a day every show, 18 shows. We would go up to Charlotte, and Gene and I would sit in one studio, and right next door in the other studio was the talent, the commentary team, who would be going through the show, the edited show, and putting the voiceover on it, and
making sure that those details are presented the way that you want them.
It's a 44-minute show,
right?
And it would take a day to record that.
Wow.
You would start at 9:30 in the morning, and if we were lucky, we were finishing at 4 or 5 o'clock, so we could dash back to Charlotte Airport to take a plane to come back here to Florida.
And that was because you're making sure that the information's being presented to the audience the right way, and the details are being presented the way that you guys expect, so that the brand is protected.
Exactly. When we go to the world and we say our major strategic initiative is to get on television to reach a new audience, you have to do it right.
Sure.
You have to do everything in your power to do it right. So we would be sitting in the studio listening to the voiceover they were putting on, and would interrupt and say, actually, no, that's not right. And I don't mean on the fact, I mean on the kind of language you would use. Having to stop the commentator saying drivers and saying riders sounds like a simple thing. But to the hardcore fan, as soon as the commentator says drivers, you think, this is some guy who's been co-opted from doing auto racing. He doesn't really know anything about bike.
Exactly.
And you lost them straight away. You've lost them. So you have to cover those details wherever possible and make the broadcast authentic, because that will be noticed by your hardcore fan. It may go straight over the head of the new fan, but it does no damage to the new fan.
Yeah.
They're getting the benefit of authenticity and the right language and something that's very dialed in, but maybe they will never notice. But if you lose the authenticity in the mind of the hardcore fan, I think you've blown it. And I think this is the same in any sport where you want to make a change. You have to bring the legacy fans with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you poke them in the eye, it's a big risk.
For sure.
So we've been. And I'm not saying we haven't made mistakes in this area. You always make mistakes, but I'm very conscious of the need to have a high quality, continuing dialogue with the fans who are very passionate about this, because I think without them we look like duds.
Absolutely.
So we need those guys.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, you've got to appeal to a new audience, but it's, I think, far too often, and it happens in a lot of sports. People, the decision makers, try to appeal only to the new, and don't pay enough attention to the folks that have been around. Michael, talk to me about this, because this is something that I'm interested to really dive into. So how long have you been with American Flat Track, first off?
I joined the team actually as a external consultant in 2015.
Okay.
I was running my own business and marketing consultancy in 2014 and 15, and Jim France, who is the major shareholder in AMA Pro Racing, and a gentleman I've known for a long time, called me and asked me if I was interested in doing some oversight and consultancy for him as he sought to regenerate Flat Track. And I said, absolutely. And now I was probably a good candidate for it, because the only thing I knew about Flat Track really was that I'd been to the Flat Track mile at Indianapolis one year when we took the MotoGP there, and I was working for Ducati. Obviously, we had Ducati boards on there. And on the Saturday night, we all went to go and watch the mile at Indy, and Valentino came, and Kenny Roberts was there, and the whole thing seemed very cool. I couldn't have told you. I couldn't have recalled the name of 5 champions in Flat Track if my life depended on it. So,
well, that's interesting. So you weren't a hardcore enthusiast coming into it. When you got in and you started to really kind of sink your teeth in and knew you had a purpose and a reason to be there, and they were looking to you to help fix really a problem of obscurity, what was the one or two things that you noticed that you were like, oh my gosh, guys, we have to fix this. This is where the ball is being dropped as far as bringing this sport to the masses. Do you remember one or two of those things?
Yes, I do. In fact, I remember the first one. It's one of those seminal moments that you never forget. I came to my first race, and that first race was the season opener 2015 at Daytona during Bike Week. And at that time, that track was on a short track that was outside of the Daytona Speedway in a basically converted parking lot. And I remember thinking, wow, this says a lot. Here is this $1 billion speedway right next door, and we're not even allowed in. What is that saying about the quality and the value of the sport? So I remember going to it thinking that's a bit strange. But when I got there, I was excited because, there's the paddock and all the pop-up tents, and you can see there is a lack of money in the paddock, but no lack of intensity. And that's kind of cool and interesting. So I was wandering around the paddock by myself. I hadn't introduced myself to anybody yet. Wandering around the paddock thinking, you know what I really want to see? Those Harley XRs. Because whether you know anything about flat track or not, you know what a Harley XR 750 is. It's the most successful racing motorcycle of all time and is an icon. And even to people who are not particularly personally Harley guys, and I would put myself in that category, a Harley XR is cool.
Yeah.
So I was wandering around the paddock thinking, I want to see where all the XRs are. And I wandered around for about 20 minutes and couldn't find one. I thought, that's a bit strange. And all the bikes I saw were all motocross bikes, 450 motocross bikes. And I thought, this is a support class. Where is the real paddock, with the flat track bikes? Couldn't find them. And it wasn't until I introduced myself to one of the race officials and had a chat with him and said, where are the XRs? And he looked at me with a blank look on my face. He said, oh, no, we don't race them here. Okay, this is the pro sport, and you're not racing these big, beautiful flat track booms. I said, why? Well, because it's a short track, and so all the riders race on 450s. And I said, well, even the factory Harley guys? Oh, yeah. The factory Harley guys are racing on a Honda CRF 450.
So you realized what you really wanted to see, and what probably folks that weren't diehards of the sport but knew enough about it probably wanted to see wasn't even available.
It wasn't even there.
Yeah.
And so what I realized was the sport had two major characteristics. One was the whole sport was centered around the rider. The pro athlete is the fulcrum for the sport, unlike any motorsport I've been involved in before, where it was the team, of which the rider is one component. Manufacturer, team crew, motorcycle rider. These are the raw ingredients of a professional motorcycle racing team, except in flat track, where it was all about the rider. So if it was a short track, the rider rode a little bike. If it was a mile, the rider rode a big bike, regardless of which class he was in. So as a fan, you turn up thinking, I want to see the big star guys on the big star, powerful, high-performance bikes, and I want to see the little class, which is the up-and-comers. I want to be able to understand something as basic and simple as that. In flat track, you couldn't do that. So on a mile track, the kids and the big pros were all riding big twins. And on a short track, the big pros and the kids were all riding 450 dirt bikes. So there was no differentiation, which is, for me, was a complete absurdity.
And it's confusing for a new fan.
Yeah, and it's before I started thinking about the commercial implications of this. And, the immediate commercial implication was that I saw at Daytona Jared Mees, the champion of the sport, a factory Harley rider whose team sponsor was Las Vegas Harley-Davidson, and he was running around on a red Honda CRF 450. This is commercial suicide. And later that season, when we got to the finale, and the finale was in Las Vegas, so the home of Las Vegas Harley-Davidson, who were the headline sponsors for the champion. Las Vegas Harley and Harley-Davidson corporate did not even bother coming to the awards party at the end of the season because their guy had won on a Honda. So,
Wow.
I mean,
So how long did it take to change, I guess, that narrative and that rule? Like, was that immediately the next season you were like, okay, we've got to fix this, guys? Or was this something that took, several years for you to really make the adjustment the way that you wanted?
actually, it's in between. Because here's the thing. However obvious the thing is that's smacking you in the face, that's got to be changed.
Yeah.
You can't just wave a magic wand and do it. Even if you're the sanctioning body, you can't just play God. It would be wonderful if you could, but
Yeah.
life doesn't work like that. What you have to do is you have to bring the community with you. They were all here before I was, and they'll all be here after I've gone.
Sure.
So you have to bring the community with you, which means that you have to do a number of things. Number one, you have to identify the problem. Number two, you have to develop a strategy to fix the problem. Number three, you have to work out where the resources are to do that. And number four, you have to convince all the people who are going to actually have to do it. So it needed doing quickly, but I couldn't just snap my fingers. Particularly coming into the sport, taking over as chief executive, or somebody who has not come up through the flat track ranks, doesn't know much about flat track, and isn't even an American. I mean, that's a long list. That's a long list of challenges
Sure.
I had to get over. So it's a balancing act between getting on with the pursuit of the future that you have to do as fast as possible, but bring the community with you and make them feel like they're not only participating, but they endorse the changes for the right reasons. So we'd identified during 2015 all these problems. I had presented a white paper to the board of AMA Pro Racing, outlining what I thought the issues were and what I thought the solutions were. We did that during 2015. They accepted that analysis and proposals, and then offered me the job to come in-house to do it, not to be a consultant anymore. And then during 2016, the following year, we didn't change anything dramatically. It was too late to do it by the end of the year. You can't just spring this on people. So we sent out basically a set of messages at the end of the 2015 season and the start of the 2016 season about what we intended to go live in 2017, and then spent all of 2016 politicking and socializing all of those things, fine-tuning them, taking feedback, tweaking things that were unrealistic or needed to be done the following year or the year after that, and came out in 2017 with this rebranded project. It went from AMA Pro Flat Track into American Flat Track, new logo, new name, class structure changed. So we went to American Flat Track Twins and American Flat Track Singles. Very simple. And if you raced in the Twins, you raced there every week, and you raced a twin regardless of the circuit, whether it was a mile or a short track or a half mile or a TT, you rode a twin. And if you were in the singles class, you rode a single every week. And that now seems a long, long time ago.
Sure.
Because no one would ever consider changing it back. There's no argument for changing it back. Not even the diehards would do that now because the racing is so good. And it's such a spectacle, aided by the fact that you know who you're going to see and what they're going to ride every week.
Exactly. You can follow the storyline because it's consistent enough to
follow the story.
I think that's
exactly
what's interesting about that really, whether it's a small new startup brand or some of the most iconic brands that have been around for a long time, what folks can learn from this story that you've shared with us today is really a couple of things. First, you have to identify the problem, and sometimes an outside source that really has no emotional connection and quite honestly sometimes doesn't really know much about the sport to begin with is the perfect place to start. That's going to help you identify problems in areas that maybe you're missing the boat or you're leaving a lot on the table, but then it's not a matter of coming in, and I think a lot of people are going to want to fix the problem immediately, and I think I was happy to hear how you said the problem was presented and then a plan was formulated. There was no massive changes taken immediately, but something that was more of a methodical plan that was overseen, and then now is what you have today, which proof is in the pudding. I mean, it's working extremely well, and I think it's a matter of how you've unrolled this idea into a plan to a list of executions to where you've got it today. We could talk for hours. I do have one more question, because you're a busy guy. I promised you to keep you to 20 minutes, and we're at 25. But this is a question that I've had for motocross, supercross, flat track, cycling. I think all of these sports can capitalize on this, but not all of them do it the right way. What are your thoughts on iconic figures in the sport? So, for example, you've got two sports that really nobody would know of if it weren't for figures in the sport: running on track and field, and then swimming. And whenever I say that, the first two people that come to someone's mind is Usain Bolt from Jamaica, and then Michael Phelps. It is not necessarily the sport, it's the iconic figure. And I think within moto and motocross, supercross, American flat track, what are your thoughts on that? Do you guys have that figure? Is it something that you've had to really cultivate? Do you think you're still missing the boat on that? Where do you stand with that as far as that being an important piece of the puzzle, is having that superhero type figure that every sport really needs?
That's a very astute question, because it actually goes to the heart of the project here. Back in, when was it? 2016, we were racing at the Black Hills Speedway in Sturgis, South Dakota, during Sturgis Week. And Harley Davidson, one of our partners and a big supporter of the sport, brought a number of their friends and other brands that they do business with to Sturgis to show them what they do. And one of those partners, Harley, brought to our race with the executive team from UFC. And back in 2015, 16, Harley was a big sponsor of UFC in an attempt to reach out to a new demographic for Harley Davidson. So they brought the UFC team to Sturgis and introduced them. And I went for a walk through our paddock with Dana White, who's the president of UFC, just have a chat, just to show him what we were doing. And we walked around for about 3 or 4 minutes, and he stopped and he turned to me and beamed, and he said, "You've got something very familiar here." I said, "Oh, how do you mean?" He said, "This raw energy and these young kids from parts of the country no one's ever heard of, you've got it in spades in your paddock." He said, "You've got something rare and beautiful here. It reminds me of right in the beginning of UFC." So we chatted about that for a couple of minutes, but he moved on. He said, let me give you some advice that no one ever gave me, but I've learned the hard way." He said, "The way you will scale this sport is not to show people endless cornering or crashes." He said, because to the uninitiated, those all look the same. It can be fun, but once you've seen one turn into, one path going into turn 4, you've seen them all unless you know what you're looking at. He said, the way you will build this sport, he said, is get America to fall in love with the kids.
Yes.
Because if they care about the kids, they will invest then to learn about what they do. And those words struck me when he said them, and they've stayed with me ever since. So what we have done since then, and through the advantage of having not only an NBC broadcast that takes us to America, but one where we do the production, we choose the storylines, and we edit it. NBC is comfortable with allowing us to do that because we do it with NASCAR Media Productions, who are very competent. So we tell the story of flat track 18 times a year on NBC. And if you watch any of those shows, you will see there is a very fine balance between us telling the story of the evening in terms of the evolution of the racing, who won and who lost and who fell off. But in between those races, and really for about the first 10 minutes of the show, we're lifting the lid on the sport. Absolutely. We're telling the story, for example, of the Bauman brothers, who are the two factory Indian riders this year. But we're not only telling the story of the Bauman brothers. At Phoenix, we interviewed their parents, because their parents give an insight into what drives those boys to be so outstanding at what they do, and where they've come from, and what sacrifices the family made in the early years. So we tell that story. Because they are the factory Indian guys, and they're brothers. So they're racing together but against each other. It's kind of interesting. Anybody could relate to that. We tell the story of the most successful female athlete we've got in the sport. In fact, one of the most successful female athletes in any motorsport anywhere in the world, Shayna Texter, who is our most successful singles rider of all time. She's won more races against the guys, not in a female class, against the guys, than anyone has. And she is 5 foot tall and well-spoken and shy and demure, and yet a demon on the bike when she gets on it. So we tell the story of her. Oh, and her brother, who is leading the Production Twins Championship this year, and the two of them had to overcome a tragedy. Their father died when they were young. He was an incredible patriarch of the family. He died. And how did they deal with that?
And it's those storylines that obviously the people that are diehards are going to be intrigued by, but more honestly, in my opinion, more importantly than that, that's what's going to bring a new spectator in. And actually, as you're saying this, it's funny. I find myself watching Formula One racing this year. Never have paid attention to it ever before, but you know what got my attention on that sport? It was the Netflix series that came out last season, and it did not show racing. It showed the storylines, the drama, and I got literally my wife made fun of me because I binged watched that entire season, and it just so happened to be right as the 2019 season was kicking off when I watched it. And you know what I did? I purchased the on-demand pass, and I've watched nearly every single one of them. I'd never watched that sport before. And that's
a typical story when it goes right. There's a show on TV called American Ninja Warriors. You may or may not have heard.
Absolutely.
It's basically amateur athletes, guys who are fund managers or plumbers or whatever, but they're people who are interested in fitness and athletic behavior. So it's this kind of obstacle course show.
Sure.
It's on TV. It attracts a larger viewing audience than Supercross. It attracts a larger viewing audience by a factor of 2 to American Flat Track. We're the pros, and Supercross are the pros. The show Supercross puts on is spectacular. So why is something with some guy who lives in a shack on the wrong end of town, but trains at 3 a.m, why is that more interesting than pro sports?
Because that backstory is there.
The backstory is the human story.
Right.
It's the story of who we would want to be in an ideal world, or who we would absolutely not want to be. It's engaging on a level that goes beyond the technical rule book and the history of the sport. And so, we almost come full circle in this conversation back to what you were asking at the beginning: is how do you balance the needs of the hardcore captive fans versus the new? If you can do it, if you can walk that tightrope and achieve the goal of reaching both, you're there. At the moment, American Flat Track is there. On this stage in the arc of our development, we are maintaining our relevancy for the hardcore fans, who are in fact many of them saying it's better than it's ever been. There's more action, more excitement, more money for the riders. Crowds are coming back. It's reaching a wider audience. So the hardcore who are positive are saying, man, you guys are presiding over a golden age of sport. But at the same time, people who may not ever ride a motorcycle, wouldn't know what flat track is, are seeing a soundbite on a commercial on NBC or sitting in a bar somewhere where Shayna Texter is talking to camera, and then you see an onboard looking up at her, hanging on for grim death, passing all these guys, and you think, I might check that out.
Exactly.
And so that's the balance we've got at the moment. And as we get bigger, it changes. If you were speaking to someone from Supercross, they might be saying a lot of different things than I am because they're more mature. They have 750,000 people watch their show every week. It's a big sport. And they may have different priorities. But I know that for American Flat Track, where we are today, that what the balancing act is between tradition and innovation.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the growth, and that's why I was so intrigued to get you on the show, and I'm thankful for Cameron making that introduction, because I knew that there had to have been something special that was going on behind the scenes, because it's not like this diamond in the rough just gets uncovered and discovered randomly and then starts randomly growing and having the success that you've been having the last several years, or last few years, and then most recently this season. There was something or a series of some things that have happened, and I think we touched on a few of them today. And I think one of the biggest is definitely those storylines. And whether you're a brand that sells a product, whether it's gear, whether you're a series, well, whatever it is, it's similar points that we had talked about pertain to everybody listening. You've got to have that story that is appealing, that grabs somebody's attention. There's so much noise in the world today with social media and all the things that we can choose to pay attention to. What are you going to do to differentiate yourself? And you guys have done a spectacular job of that. And Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. And I think your story is something that's going to be interesting to a lot of folks. And I think there's so many layers to your story that we'd love to have you back on in the future to talk more about it, and just to kind of see where the series ends up this year, and maybe do a recap or something along those lines, because there's more than we had time to cover today, obviously, but I'm grateful to have you on the show.
Pleasure. I'm happy to do it again sometime.
Thank you for listening to the Moto Marketing Podcast. If your goal is to get real, measurable results from your marketing that will grow your company revenue, then check out how Impakt Media can get the same results that they have for Moto's most iconic brands by visiting thinkimpakt.com. That's THINKIMPAKT.com. Have a marketing question that you want answered on the show? Send your questions to questions@motomarketingpodcast.com. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Moto Marketing Podcast.